Welcome to CMMS Radio, a podcast and general resource for all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, from selection to implementation to help you make better choices and have a successful CMMS journey. We'll bring in experts along the way to help us learn more about CMMS, facilities operations, and much more. If you need help with the CMMS project, send a message at CMMSradio.com using the What's on Your Mind link. Suggest a topic, share your CMMS story, or ask questions. The Reliable Plant Conference and Exhibition is happening June 3rd through June 6th, 2024 in Chicago, Illinois. Secure your 10% discount by visiting conference.reliableplant.com. Click on Register Now and enter the code CMMS. All right. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Today, we're joined by Erik Jupje of R2 Reliability and Reliability Academy. We're going to talk about CMMS, maintenance and reliability, and a whole lot more. They help countless companies around the globe, 50 plus countries. They've trained thousands of people throughout the industry, and they're in all major industries. Erik developed the Road to Reliability framework and is passionate about getting you unstuck from your reactive maintenance nightmare. So let's get you on the road to greater reliability. Erik, welcome to CMMS Radio.
Thank you, Greg. Great to be here.
It's awesome to have you on. I know we've been trying to put this together. We had a little bit of a meeting previously, so thanks for coming back and getting this episode recorded. Now, everybody should know you're very active on LinkedIn, and one of our mutual friends, and he himself is a bona fide expert as well in the maintenance and reliability space. His name's Brian Bieschke, and he said to tell you, say it louder, and he does that on many of your posts. Yet to this day, neither of you have been able to find the volume button on LinkedIn. What's that all about?
Yeah, Brian and I share a lot of common thoughts about the messages that need to get out, and I think we both feel that a lot of those messages get drowned in the market. They don't get heard enough. So Brian has come up with this inside joke, basically, turn up the volume, say it louder so more people hear it. But I think that's a really important point, is that there's some key messages that I think a big part of our industry need to hear more, need to hear better, because with the right kind of messages, the right kind of approach, you can make life a lot easier, you can make a lot more improvement. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of messages that do come out in the industry are often targeted by people who want to sell the product, which is not always the best solution or the best fit for the people who need help.
Absolutely. And I think, one thing about CMMS Radio is sometimes I'll have someone on that represents a product, and that's okay. But when we're talking about these things, I don't really talk about the products or the companies that provide them. I'm very interested in the process and more so the people and how we kind of organize and influence culture within a maintenance operation to get things moving toward arriving at actual reliability. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions for people when it comes to what maintenance and reliability really is. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and we've talked about this before, and it's around the people. You've said that organizations around the world are missing the gold mine of talent that they have right there already on their team. And I wanted to ask you, why is this so important and how can it change?
Well, it's so important because ultimately everything you do is based around your people, right? So when it comes to maintenance or reliability, it's the people that execute the work, it's the people that plan the work, it's the people that schedule the work, it's the people that order the parts, it's the people that put the process together, it's the people that basically develop your PM programs, that analyze your failures, it's the people that look at your, do the RCA. So it's all about people and the quality of your people. And so developing them and having good people having the right knowledge is key to your success. But the key thing is a key thing I feel is that a lot of organizations have a lot more talent in their team than they really know that they have. And I think what happens in a lot of organizations is They get stuck over time for a number of reasons into this reactive maintenance environment, which is quite demotivating to people. It's a lot of it's stressful. It's a lot of firefighting, and a lot of people know that you can get out of that. You can do better, but for whatever reason, the organizations remain stuck in there, and that then leads to kind of people kind of stepping back and often not really showing up what they can really show. And so I think it's really important for organizations to understand the quality of the people they have, train them, develop them, and get the most out of the people. And if you do that, you can really make a massive step change. Because if we're honest, most of the things you need to do around maintenance and reliability are not really that complicated. They're not that complex. And they're well understood and well known. So it's a matter of getting the organization and the people to do the right things, to understand what they need to do, how they need to do it, and then, letting them do it, getting out of the way and making it actually easier. As a manager, that's a key job, to make your team, make it easy for your team to do the right things and do their work, take the blockers out of their way.
So when doing that and actually being in that environment and trying to effect that actual kind of change, right, for an organization to adopt a better approach to change management, really understand their people and their teams and get them truly empowered to do great work, do you find that the biggest challenge is within the organization, the revenue side, truly understanding the contributions that the maintenance side brings to the table for revenue, and then vice versa, maintenance wanting to really be connected to the business, they have to kind of learn how to speak almost a different language to get those projects to really align everyone?
Yeah, that's a common problem, right? I think the people on the revenue side of things, the leadership, the people in the finance positions, the CEOs, the plan manager, etc., typically don't have a background in maintenance and reliability, and they don't really have that much of an understanding of how that drives value, and they typically start to see maintenance and reliability as a result. Um, as just an unnecessary evil, a big cost that they need to minimize. And typically, when you're stuck in a reactive environment, maintenance performance isn't that great. You spend a lot of money, you still incur downtime. So they see it as something that they actually need to minimize rather than an area where they need to invest in to improve performance. And I think at the other end of the organization, you've got the maintenance managers. Very often, they've come up through from the trade, have a very strong technical background. That's typically why they get promoted, right? But often they might lack a bit of skills around the business management, the ability to sell the value of maintenance and reliability to more senior leadership, to build a business case, to show a roadmap for change. So that makes the conversation kind of get lost. There's this kind of no man's land in between where the communication doesn't happen. I think the other thing that makes things worse, and that's something we're now exploring internally, um, is historically we've always tried to see these maintenance reliability improvement journeys as big multi-year marathons, right? It takes 4 or 5 years, a lot of investment. That's a very hard sell when you're in a reactive environment because the CEO is going to go like, hold on, you want me to spend how much? And I'm going to get a payback when? It's very, very hard to sell, especially if you're not good at selling that. And it's also hard to sell when you haven't got a track record of performance. So what we're now trying to do with our clients is say, okay, hold on, let's break that journey down into much smaller steps, into what we call reliability strategy sprints or reliability sprints, where you say, okay, step one, get your strategy together. Step two, implement planning and scheduling so you get productivity. Step three, fix your PM program. And by making them much smaller, you reduce the resistance, you reduce the investment need, you make the sale to the CEO or to your plant leadership much easier because it's a specific improvement journey. Plus, to be honest, when you have these smaller journeys or smaller improvements, um, it's much more likely that the maintenance manager can actually make a big part of them themselves without having to get a lot of leadership on board. And then once you've got a couple of runs on the board and you start seeing improvement, then you can start going to your CEO and say, hey, you see how much improvement we've made? Well, for the next step, we're going to need some more money. So how about you chip in? But that becomes a much easier sell at that point.
Yeah, because at that point now they're seeing, we'll say, the
Results.
fruits of those labors,
Yeah.
and it's proof and support for, we're now starting to do the right thing, we'd like to do more of that. And then the ultimate goal would be, at some point through maturation or maintenance maturity, you're now moving towards the possibility of constant process improvement. No?
Yeah, yeah, and I think so. For me, one of the key things is if we can break that big 5 year journey into, oh, let's do this for the next 6 to 12 months and make an improvement, show and be able to demonstrate the value that's had, and then say, right, okay, the next step is this, and then as you go, then it becomes easier to to sell the value, and then eventually, once you've got 3 or 4 of those kind of sprints behind each other, you get your core processes working, then it really becomes all about continuous improvement.
So now I want to switch this a little bit back to CMMS because I'm
Hmm.
always kind of swimming around in that world. And for everybody, just to understand, you can drop the computerized, you can drop the system or the solution. So the maintenance management, what that really is, how that really works, and how you achieve fundamental excellence is one of the things I'm always trying to explore. But with CMMS platforms in particular, and I saw something that you posted today, and it's something that I'm always very interested in. And this revolves around the idea that, you know, does your CMMS suck? And what are the appropriate steps that you could take or should take to minimize the likelihood that you end up in that situation? And I wanted to have you talk a little bit about that. There's going to be an article that I can link people to. You can find it out on LinkedIn that you wrote. And I thought it was really a solid list of things that people should be considering. But could you talk a little bit about that here?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the concept where the post came from is that, over the years, I've had so many people saying, hey, we need a new CMS or we need a CMS. What's the best? And well, the simple answer is there is no best, right? There's a lot of different solutions, and it really depends on what you need. My personal experience for years has been in SAP because I worked in large multinationals around the world. SAP is a monster. It's a beast, and it's difficult to tame, as I say in the post. But it's very powerful. So if you get it to work for you, and if you work the process, you can do a lot. A lot of organizations never managed in taming SAP. Um, but so when people ask me for, okay, what's the best CMS, I go like, well, you need to figure out what it is you need, right? So that's what we talked about in the post. I said, well, what is it you need? What is it? What are the things you need operationally? What are the things you need in terms of features and functionality? Are you a big organization with a lot of technicians, and therefore you need a good scheduling solution? Can you get that scheduling solution through the CMS, or potentially through a CMS and an add-on? That's the even additional complication, because actually that scheduling piece is pretty weak in many CMS solutions in the market, to be honest. So being clear about what it is you need, what your process is, because ultimately, and I don't think I actually talked enough about that in the post, is the CMS is supposed to enable your work processes, right? Um, and so you need to be very clear, okay, how does work get done around here? And therefore, what do we need the CMS to do? And to some degree, there may be a give or take, because you've got to be careful with customizing CMSs too much, especially comes to, say, work management process. You shouldn't be having to customize it too much because it's a pretty standard process. But being clear about your process, your needs around features and functionality and everything else. Um, think about whether you need to tie it in with other solutions. So, if it's a CMS and not an ERP, you may need to tie in with a procurement platform that you have for ordering spares and managing your inventory, because that's pretty critical, right? Um, reporting, KPIs. Not many CMS platforms, especially mid-tier that I've seen, have good metrics built in. They'll have a bunch of metrics, but they're actually not really metrics that drive your work processes. So you need to be clear about that and say, okay, well, if they haven't got them in, can I get them? Or are you just going to use something externally like Power BI, which most companies nowadays have, because pretty much everybody's on Microsoft, right? So everybody has access to Power BI, for example. And so there's a range of those kind of things that you need to think through. Um, Key one ultimately also is, okay, well, once you figure out your CMS, how are you going to implement it? How are you going to get the training and the support? Because that's where a lot of organizations go wrong. They roll out a new CMS. They probably haven't spent enough time thinking about their process. But then when they do roll it out, their training, for example, is typically very transactional based. I saw it myself in my career. You do SAP training, and I forgot most of the codes already, but you learn the SAP codes, but people don't actually tell you, say, right, here's the process. This step of the process, you're supposed to do that for these reasons, and this is how you do it in SAP with this transaction. They just teach you actual transactions. So a lot of people don't actually understand why they're doing what they're doing. So that's really important, because if you don't understand why you're doing it and where it fits into the bigger process, what happens? People stop doing it, or they don't really do it, right? But if people
Right.
understand why they're doing it and what the step is in the bigger process and why it's so important, because if they don't do it, what goes wrong down the line, you're going to get a much better response because most people want to do a good job.
Would you say on that very specific aspect of this whole kind of journey that organizations are going through, that to really solve for that, that happens in the beginning before there's even been a solution selected and brought in, where, getting together with the frontline workforce, taking a go and see approach to spend time in their workday to understand what that work process is and build kind of that buy-in and understand the why ahead of time. Does that seem a better practice
Yeah,
that orgs aren't willing to do?
certainly early in the process, it might be difficult to do ahead of time, but very early in the process, and I would probably suggest you want to do that before you make a final decision. So I would say typically, you would probably go in your selection process with maybe say 3 or 4 kind of ideal candidates. That's a great time to actually then look at your process, talk to the vendors, and say, right, here's our process. How do you do this? How do you do that? Can you do this? And work that through. Um, so yeah, absolutely important, and it's important to get your frontline involved. Unfortunately, very very often CMS selection is driven by um, IT and finance. And actually, even though it's a core maintenance process and maintenance solution, maintenance and reliability often have a secondary influence, especially when it's an ERP. Which there's obviously things to be said that finance and IT have a major voice there. But yeah.
Of course, of course. And then speaking of that, you were talking a few minutes ago about the KPIs and the metrics and how those often can be less meaningful for maintenance operations, but they might be meaningful for leadership. And in other words, I wanted to ask you, is there really a secondary or a different set of KPIs that actually matter for maintenance operations that are of less interest to leadership, but they want to see it interpreted in a different form of KPIs that make sense for the balance sheet and those types of moving metrics?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because ultimately, uh, if you're at the top of the organization, say you're a CEO of a sizable industrial plant, going to be thinking about, okay, safety. You're going to be thinking about production. You're going to think about revenue and cost. Um, Maintenance influences the cost, obviously, a big part, because very often it's 25-30% of your total OPEX in a large scale plant. And it influences production through reliability. But they necessarily probably won't actually want to see things like schedule compliance, or the amount of braking you have, or you know downtime by machine, or the whole range of kind of things that you as a maintenance manager would need to see to be able to manage your maintenance processes. So there is indeed a level of things that need to roll up, but it's really important also though that you can link the maintenance activities to those high level metrics. So you can say, hey, you see that production, you see why that's so high? It's because we had massive availability and reliability this month. And you know why that's the case? Well, that's because of this and this. You want to basically have that line of sight between the top metrics and the lower ones. But there will always be some that are useful for managing your maintenance process. So a classic one is schedule compliance. It's really, really important to manage your stability in your work environment. But for a CEO, that's not going to be a very exciting metric, and he or she would not be looking at that. So there is always going to be some metrics that you keep at that management level, and at the kind of the senior level will be other ones. But yeah, you want to have that line of sight. That's really important.
And then the other thing around this kind of concept, what is the best or the number one CMMS? We essentially agree that it's based on your work process, and maybe even what I like to believe is it's the one that your people will use.
Hmm.
Is it more common that it seems to me it's more common that maintenance teams, people that have to use a CMMS, find it to be disruptive, cumbersome, ineffective, asking for too much information? Or does that really come from their own general resistance? Like, what's the reality of what you've seen over the years with platforms that these individuals doing this great work have to interact with? What's the biggest barrier to their adoption and use?
So I think first of all, I really like the phrase that you said. The best CMS is the one you use, right? Because there's a lot of value there. Um, and so that resistance, I think, comes from a few things. So like you say, there's some of these, I mentioned SAP before, right? So I'm going to use SAP because that's where a lot of my experience is. But SAP, like I said, is a beast. It's complicated to use. So that's one issue, is that quite a few of these CMSs are fairly complicated. And unless you're in them every day, it becomes pretty hard to remember what to do and how to do it. But even with those kind of platforms, there's a lot of things you can do to make it easier. So even in the old versions of SAP, and it's improved a lot, but even in the old versions, you could put a dashboard together where you could have your most common transactions mapped out on a process flow. So it becomes easier for people to understand what to do. Plus good training helps a lot, and I think a lot of organizations don't train their people well enough in SAP or whatever CMS, right? And very often what happens is it's an initial training when the program is run out or the platform is run out, but then people who come in later in the organization, they don't get that initial training. If they're lucky, they'll get some computer-based training that says press this button, press that button, right? Usually not that effective. So capability and training and understanding is an important thing. You mentioned the kind of all the data that the system asks for. Well, that's not the system's fault, right? That's us basically asking people to fill in 20 different fields. And then the question is, well, do we need all 20 fields? And if we're asking people to fill in 20 fields, who's looking at those 20 fields? Because if nobody's looking at those 20 fields, then why are we gathering all that data? And I think that's one of the big frustrations with the front line is they're filling in these 20 fields initially. They don't see any evidence that somebody's looking at that data or using that data. And eventually they go like, well, why should I bother? You get the occasional joker who then starts putting rubbish in the fields and doesn't get pulled up on it, and suddenly going to see nobody's looking at it. But that's a really important thing. And it's one of the things we teach us on our training is like, look, if you ask for feedback from say your frontline maintenance technicians on a maintenance plan, you better act on that feedback. Because if you ask for feedback over and over and you never do anything with it, people will stop giving it to you. So it's the same with kind of the data you put in the CMS. You've got to use it. So it's much better to have less data, but high quality data that you use than asking for 20 fields that may or may not get filled in, potentially with poor quality data that nobody looks at. So I think, yeah, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say that just reminds me of all the times I was more facilities focused rather than plant focused, but there were probably 60 or 70 different manufacturing environments I was helping people in. But the main point of resistance when it came to the frontline workforce and the people that actually need to use this to give us this data, they didn't want too many clicks and they didn't want it to disrupt the work that they already know how to do. And they always said, make this straightforward for me. Don't make me do any nonsense. If I have to do too many backflips, I'm not going to do it. I got work to do. And that's the main thing. Is that's why I think it's so important that they're involved in either the decision and the selection, or at least conveying what's meaningful to them. And it's a potential solution to that problem. And then what you were talking about leads me to this concept of garbage in, garbage out. If the data you're collecting isn't going to be used, or if it's useless in the first place. For example, you mentioned preventive maintenance. There are a lot of preventive maintenance activities that are happening around the world as we speak right now that are simply unnecessary. What do you think of that?
100% true. Yeah. Before I answer that one, I just want to go back to one thing you just mentioned there, where you're saying, technicians saying, "Look, don't make it too hard for me because I've got work to do." I want to just pick up on that because it is actually really, really important also that we educate the whole maintenance workforce that closing out work in the CMS and administrating the CMS is part of the work. It's not unnecessary admin burden. We need to treat it as, look, this is key to our continuous improvement loop, right? If we don't put anything into that system to say, here's what we've done, here's what we found, here's the results, and here's what recommendations. If we don't put that in, we can't analyze and improve. So it's really, really important that technicians get to understand that administrating the CMS is part of the work. It's not unnecessary admin, and it needs to be done. And yes, we need to make it as simple as we can, and we need to make it as efficient as we can. But after that, don't give me any bullshit. Do it.
All
right? So
right.
it's really, really important that that final bit is also there. I say, yeah, we get it, guys. We want to make it as efficient, as effective as possible. But then after that, it's your job to do it because it's important. Um, but once technicians see that when they enter history or when they give feedback, it gets used, they go like, oh, okay, I might do that one again. And that goes back to the comment you said earlier about so many PM tasks out around the world are not adding value. Yeah, it's just true because typically, I think it was Mowbray who said in his book RCM2 that between 40 to 60% of PM tasks add no value. And that's because a lot of those PMs come from not analyzing the actual potential failure mode. So, a maintenance task is aimed to prevent or mitigate the consequences of a failure mode, right? But a lot of the PMs enter the CMS on the basis of a OEM instruction in a manual that may or may not be relevant to your environment or your equipment. A lot of work is entered because something has happened in the plant at a certain point in time, and somebody says, let's put a check in to check that. So before you know it, typically a lot of safety incidents, but also production incidents, failures result into people putting in additional PMs. And very often you get these things like, well, check this. And they've, okay, well, check this for what? What's the consequence? And then we're going to, so yeah, there's a lot of PMs out there that add very little value. And you just got to eliminate them. What you need to do is you need to train your team to understand how you build good PM programs, what reliability principles you need to apply. Make sure that every task you have is linked to a failure mode, a credible failure mode, and that the task you have is actually going to be effective in dealing with the consequence of that failure mode or the actual failure mode itself. And if not, get rid of it, or at least reduce the frequency. Because that's the other thing I often say to people: say, look, if you don't have, if you're not sure, but you don't think it's a value-adding task, but you're a little bit concerned about completely eliminating it, if it's a monthly, turn it to 2 monthly. You just have to work. And very often that can be a very low-risk approach of doing that if you're not comfortable in eliminating. But in most cases, yeah, just get rid of those tasks that don't need doing. At the same time, you need to look at your correctives, your historical failures, and say, hey, why did that fail? And should I have done a PM to prevent it from failing? Now, that's not always the case. It could be a design defect, but yeah.
So I want to talk about that very specifically and get some of your insights on this. So when we have the unplanned downtime or a failure, there's corrective responses, and we want to determine how we're going to mitigate that in the future. Is there a certain threshold of impact to the organization on production, the cost, the value, the overall impact, where it would start to make sense that some of these assets, the best possible approach is to run them to failure? Is that such a thing?
For sure. Run to failure is a very valid maintenance strategy. If the impact is low, the consequence to production and safety and cost is low, run it to failure. How many light bulbs in your house do you go and replace proactively?
None.
None, right? Yeah. So run to failure, and it's the same in an industrial plant. I mean, how many, so take lighting, right? Typically in a plant, you are not going to go and replace light bulbs proactively. The only ones that you might do proactively would be, flash deck lights, for example, that you can't get to, and they have a known span of life and they're safety critical. You replace them on a certain frequency. May not be the best from a reliability perspective, but you just know that, okay, we'll have an outage. I can get to the stack. I'm going to replace it. It will be good for another 4 years. But your general area lighting, you don't do it. Same with emergency lighting. You might replace them because of the critical function. But lighting, run to failure. And there'll be a lot of other things in your plant that you go like, well, that transmitter, I'm just going to run it through failure. Transmitters, for example, nowadays, right, is a classic example where you can run most of them to failure. You need to distinguish between transmitters with protective functions, safety functions, and general process control or process indication. So many transmitters nowadays are smart. They'll give you an indication, and you can even build into your DCS a flip over, for example, that if you've got a control and a trip next to each other, if the control doesn't work, you use the trip temporarily, whatever. But there's so many things you can do to remove the burden of having PMs in there that are not really adding value or are too much for what you're doing. So absolutely, run to failure is a very valid strategy. And so when you have these failures, you look and say, okay, am I happy to accept that failure going forward? Yes and no. And if yes, fine. And if no, well, then what was the root cause for that failure? Was it a lack of PM, or was it another issue, a design issue, a design defect, or a construction issue, or installation issue, whatever, and then deal with it.
Yeah, and again, this is what's important about this is when people can hear this from you and learn from you about these real and practical things that happen in the world of maintenance and reliability, it will resonate with them, and maybe they'll start to think about it and evaluate what they're doing and look for those opportunities. Because I think I start to equate a lot of these things to one of the primary areas. I think you would agree with this. I'm going to ask you. There's a question here eventually. When we look at an area where an organization can make some kind of a change within how they're approaching maintenance and reliability, one thing they can look at is waste. So rather than just, the preventive maintenance items themselves, but how we're diverting labor and resources when it's unnecessary, or something like kitting or full kitting ahead of starting a particular scheduled event can eliminate all those types of waste. Is that one of the most critical areas that are overlooked by maintenance teams, is the opportunity to eliminate waste?
Yeah, I think I was just thinking a little bit about that, but absolutely, because actually, I've written a post or something in the past about this. But basically, if you look at the framework that we teach, is basically the core processes that organizations need to get in place to really improve their maintenance reliability performance. One, planning and scheduling to create a more stable working environment, right? Two, improve your preventive maintenance, so you're doing the work that needs doing, that adds value, and you get rid of all the work that doesn't need doing, and you add in the work that's missing. And then three, defect elimination and root cause analysis to stop the repeat failures. All three of those are essentially waste elimination. Planning and scheduling is about eliminating the waste in your day-to-day work process by preparing the work, i.e., planning the work, so that your technicians can go and do it efficiently. They're not stopping the job because the part is not there, because the tool is not there, or because the instruction is not clear. No, when they start the job, they can finish the job without unnecessary delays and stoppages. So planning and scheduling is all about eliminating waste in the execution of maintenance, and there's a lot of waste typically. When it comes to your PM program, it's the same. You're eliminating waste in terms of jobs that you're doing but that don't add value, right? So that is eliminating waste. It's a big form of waste. And then the third one, defect elimination and root cause analysis, is eliminating waste of repeat failures that shouldn't have to happen. You've had that failure in the past. Eliminate the root cause, and it doesn't happen again. If you don't do it, you have all these repeat failures coming through again and again and again, and that's what we see in a lot of plants, and that's a form of waste too. So actually, yeah, from that perspective, it's all about eliminating waste. I don't hammer on it too much, partly because I feel that in a lot of organizations, lean has, which is all about eliminating waste, right? Lean has gotten a bit of a bad rep because I think historically it's not been done well. I'm not a lean expert, but from what I understand, lean is something that came across from the Japanese, with the Toyota production system and others. But they fundamentally built that whole mindset and culture in their organization. Whereas in a lot of organizations I've seen in the West, and I worked for a few which did the same, they took lean as a concept. They saw the results in some of those Japanese companies. Said, hey, that's amazing, that's fantastic. But then they took the high level superficial activities, 5S this and 5S that, and all kinds of other things, without underpinning it with the right kind of culture and behaviors and everything else. So they never got the sustained improvements that the Japanese companies or other companies did get, because they built it up from the ground up with the right behaviors. So I'm not a big focus on lean, because I think it's got a bad rap, but the concept is very, very powerful, right? Eliminate that waste, which is exactly what it's all about.
And then getting back to the things we talk about when it comes to culture and how to affect an improved culture within an organization, this idea of building something from the ground up, which we all build things from the ground up, but obviously we don't. Some people try to come in and start on level 2, and you just can't. And I think that's one of the barriers to change management, where organizations are, it's too painful for them to stop and do that right, to build that culture and that outcome over a period of time. it's just too painful. We talked about it early on today when we were looking at timeline, and if a CEO says, wait, it's going to take me how long, and I'm only going to get this return. Whereas if somebody can make a case and gather all this information, I was just having a conversation with someone last night about the same thing, and they're conveying to leadership all these details, and they say, and that's going to result in a $15 million return. And the guy stopped and said, go ahead, proceed with the project, as soon as he understood where the value was. So all this kind of culminates in the same way, and we keep dancing around it. And I want to be mindful of time today. So I want to kind of switch gears a little bit, move away from all this kind of good stuff that we're talking about in maintenance and reliability. I want to ask first about the Reliability Academy and how that's making such an impact, because when we talked about it the other day and I read about it some more since then, it seems like a really viable option to solve one of the problems that I see in the world, where we have a skilled labor shortage. There's, issues with tradesmen, and this offers an educational path that can help with that and improve everybody's education around the space of maintenance and get certifications and things like that. Yeah.
Yep, yeah, correct. So, at the Reliability Academy, what we do is we work with our clients to basically build capability in their organization. So we're not a consulting organization. Our whole focus is to basically build capability in a client's organization by training and coaching their team. So we will train them in planning and scheduling. We can then help them, coach them with implementation of that planning and scheduling process. The whole idea being is they learn what planning and scheduling should look like. They learn how to implement it. If they want, they can get coaching from us to then implement it, so that basically they have an effective planning and scheduling process in place, done by themselves, which is, in my view, in my experience, way better than going out and bringing in external consultants. Nothing wrong with external consultants. They bring capability and speed and things that you can't really get if you do everything internally. But typically, things that are done internally just yield way better sustainability long term, because people own what they've implemented themselves. So that's the whole remit. So we focus on building that capability through training and adding a coaching component to help people implement, because we did see that when we train people, say, right, for example, this is how planning and scheduling should work, and here's how you implement it in an organization. We did see people go like, okay, that's good, but then skip critical steps in the implementation process. So that's why we're adding the coaching piece. But yeah, it's working well, and it's a solution that we can deploy to pretty much any company and client around the world, because it's all online and virtual.
I think it also helps with the concept of succession planning. When we see some of the, we all know, and that's what I was really getting at, is we see a difference and an impact that's going to come from people that retire, move on to, live their life a little bit differently, and they're taking all that knowledge with them. And we need succession planning within our existing teams at all these organizations, big or small, so that people are not flying blind, doing any guesswork. There should be materials, videos, and resources that are part of your team already, so that you don't have to go out and bring in a consultant. Consultants are great. You get the right consultant, you're going to get results, but it's probably going to be very expensive because they really know what they're doing if it's the right consultant. And you can avoid all that and make just a better team worldwide when it comes to our various maintenance people that are out there making it happen. A couple of fun questions, and I'm going to let you get going on your day. Number one, what is your favorite music?
Oh, favorite music. Jeez. I have a wide taste, so I like things from Creedence Clearwater Revival to opera.
All right.
So it depends on my mood, to be very honest.
Very good. Very good. Music works that way. So next one, and all of these, there's no right or wrong answers. This is just a fun part of the journey. What is your favorite sport or hobby? And if it's a sport, you don't have to actually participate in it. Maybe you watch it and you like to follow that sport. Favorite sport or hobby?
In terms of sport, it's got to be football. And with football, I mean the beautiful game with the round ball. I've always enjoyed it. And my son is working hard to try and become professional football. So it's kind of a big thing in our family. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. And then Here's one where we really gotta pay attention, everyone. There's no right or wrong answers to this. There's a lot of them. I just have to ask you, Erik, what is your perspective or philosophy on work-life balance?
So, if you like what you're doing, then work is no longer kind of work in the traditional sense. It's just something you enjoy doing, right? So your work-life balance becomes so much easier to achieve, right? And when you work long hours and hard hours, it doesn't feel like that. So that's great. But luxury, not everybody has that luxury. So I think ultimately, in large corporations where many of us work or have worked, it's really important to protect that, and you've got to do that yourself. Your boss isn't going to do it for you. Um, ultimately, I think vast majority of us live first and work second. So we've got to keep that in mind.
Yeah, definitely. And again, the reason I say no right or wrong answers is I want people that come on the show to be really comfortable expressing how they see it, because that might resonate with someone and give them an idea that, oh yeah, I kind of do that too. That's cool. Whatever. No particular outcome other than something people can chew on and think about and appreciate and get to know you better. So with that, I want to remind everyone, if you're interested in connecting with Erik and learning about what they're doing, you can find him on LinkedIn. Very active, puts out great content and guidance. I would refer to it as guidance, not content, because if you go through and you read these and really understand it, not just based on what you heard here today, you'll see that it's real and it's practical and it's designed to actually get you somewhere. That's what that's all about. That's why I'm a fan of it. That's why I wanted to have Erik on with us today. And the other thing you can do is you can go to reliabilityacademy.com and learn all about what they're doing. And with that, I want to thank you once again, Erik, for joining me today on CMMS Radio. This was really awesome to talk to you.
It was great, Greg, and thanks you for having me.
My pleasure. Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit CMMSradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey. The Reliable Plant Conference and Exhibition is happening June 3rd through June 6th, 2024 in Chicago, Illinois. Secure your 10% discount by visiting conference.reliableplant.com. Click on Register Now and enter the code CMMS.